Right, I've got the thumbs up from Jackson down the back. So we're getting ready to start. And good to see we've got some new faces in the auditorium today. Who was here yesterday? Can I have a show of hands? Oh, look at that. It was so good you came back for a second day. I like that. Now, for those of you who weren't here yesterday, we had a great speaker to cap off or round off the day for us. And it's the first time that we've actually had the executive director of Argonaut up here to do their presentation for them. So Argonaut's been really long-term supporters of what we do, and we're really, really pleased to have them on board again in 2022. But one of the things that David pointed out that I thought was really interesting, one of the standout from my point of view, was, do you remember he put up a slide, and on that slide he showed the top 10 performing stocks on the ASX 300. What was the interesting thing? What do you reckon was the interesting thing about that slide? Anyone else pick it? Out of that top 10, 5 of them weren't renewables, 3 of them were oil and gas, and 2 of them were coal. So that would say to all of us in the room that we're here to make a bit of money, aren't we? There is definitely a runway of opportunity for us before that net zero kicks in 2050 for us to make a bit of money. And we like the sound of that. As someone once said to me, you cannot, at this point in time, mine copper with wind. So let's see what we can do today to add to our portfolio. And we've got a big day. We've got 23 presentations up here on stage. So a bit to get through for my presenters that are in the room today. If you were here with Pete, Pete's a pretty genial sort of guy. I'm a bit more Madam Lash, despite the outfit. So I will be ringing the bell at 3 minutes, sticking my fingers up at 2 minutes. I'll be standing up at 1 minute, and I'll be walking very, very close to you. And as I said to the guys yesterday, there are no stairs on the other side of the stage. To those of you who are watching out in cyberspace, wherever you want to call it, wherever you are around the world, welcome. Thanks for being on board today. It's great to have your company as well. Now, the great thing about being here, of course, at the conference is we get the opportunity to speak to these people that are presenting. So if you like something they have to say, you don't like something they have to say, then go up and have a chat with them. That's what this is all about. And it's great that with the borders down now, we've got all these people flying in internationally and from the eastern. You. Right, let's get this show on the road. It is 8:56. We're supposed to kick off at 9, but the closer we get to Stewie's sausage rolls at morning tea, the better, so we can think about what we've got for investments. So starting us off this morning is a familiar face for those of you who were here last year. And in fact, his talk generated the most chatter on social media. So you were interested in what he had to say, and it went out there and more people were interested. So he was so good, we've got him back again for a second year. Now, he is, if you haven't met this fella before, he's got a bit of a thing for the Perth Basin. It may be because he looked at his world as a geo and he thought, now, how can I get to work close to home? I know, I've identified somewhere that I can do my PhD on. So he did. And that little area, of course, is the Northern Perth Basin. Dr. Darren Ferdinando, would you like to come up and join us? So up he comes with us today. Today, his talk is going to expand on the myths of the Perth Basin, the myth conceptions, if you like, of the Perth Basin. To start off day 2, would you make him very welcome, please, everyone?
Thank you very much, Chrissy. Look, I'd like to talk to you today to start off the conference with myths and misconceptions of the Northern Perth Basin. Perhaps what we should start off is, what is a myth anyway? So some of the more interesting definitions that I found up on the web was, the first one was a widely held but false belief or idea. Now, I'm not actually that sure that a myth has to be false. I always thought the best myths had a bit of truth in amongst them. So what I actually prefer as my best definition is, a myth is a misrepresentation of the truth. So I reckon we go with this one. So the first myth, number 1, the North Perth Basin is gassy. Now, what I have shown there in this nice big pie chart is the total recoverable volumes by phase in the North Perth Basin. 80% of the total recoverable volumes in the North Perth Basin are gas. The other 20% split between oil and condensate. So pretty much on a whole of basin basis, it's not a myth, it's actual truth. But there's always a lot more to it when you start digging in. Not all the plays are equal. And for those of you that aren't geologists, which is probably the vast majority of you, a play is something that kids do. But when you're a geologist, you're allowed to play all the time. And instead, a geologist play is a set of rocks of a certain age. And what I have here is a graph of, I've got on this y-axis, my geological age, and then my discovered volumes on the x-axis. We have a look at the top here, the youngest rocks, and I say youngest, these rocks are actually 250 million years old, so young for geologists, but not young for most people here. We see there is a decent amount of oil being found, especially in the Cockatoo Shale, but also about a third of the hydrocarbons in the Dongara sandstone are oil on a BOE basis, that's barrel of oil equivalent. As we get older and older and get out to the kingier play, which I'm certain you'll hear a bit more about later on in some of today's talks. But that kingier play is where the Waitsia, West Erregulla, South Erregulla, Lockyer Deep discoveries are all hosted. As we get deeper and deeper and older, around about this time, it's 290 million years old, it becomes more and more gas prone. So what we're seeing is chronological or time-based variations in the hydrocarbon phase. But what about spatial or geographic-based variations in the phase? So to have a look at that, I've drawn a line down the centre north-south of the North Perth Basin. It is following a feature called the Mountain Bridge Fault. And what we're going to do is have a look on the east side and then the west side. But first off, we've got to move away from this geographic Landsat view, and I want to bring us into the subsurface. So let's have a look at what the geology is like. So this is a view of the shape of the base of the Northern Perth Basin. And blue areas, hey, that was good. Blue areas here are where it's deep, or that's where the North Perth Basin is the thickest. The brown areas, where it's the base of the North Perth Basin is shallow, so it's at its thinnest here. So what we're going to do now is have a look at what's happening on the eastern side in terms of the hydrocarbons. And what we see is it's not 80% gas. Out to the east of the Mountain Bridge Fault, it is 95% gas in terms of what's been discovered in the North Perth Basin. And also, interestingly, the wells are quite deep, generally greater than 3,000 metres depth to reach these targets. So what happens when we go off to the west side? Are we still going to see these high levels of gas coming through there? No, what we actually start to see, the wells are generally shallower, generally less than 2,500 metres deep or 2.5 kilometres below sea level. But we now see an even split, roughly 50-50, between oil and gas on a barrel of oil equivalent basis on what has been discovered. So in terms of the first myth, that the North Perth Basin is gassy, on a whole of basin basis, it's not a myth, it's fact. There is far more discovered barrel of oil equivalent of gas than what there is of oil in the North Perth Basin. But it depends on where you look and also what play or when it was deposited, and you go through and have a look. There is definitely an opportunity for companies and investors. If you can find a company that's willing to head out west to chase oil, there is a great opportunity there. But if you're looking for gas, head east. The second myth, the Northern Perth Basin has run its race and there's nothing more to discover. Now, the North Perth Basin, for those that were listening to me last year, has got a history of resurgence of new plays coming through and then being drilled out, becoming mature, nothing more to be found, and then additional plays coming on that. So what we have here is in blue in the centre tracks, the Dongara and Wodgina formation plays. That's where the Dongara gas field and in the 2000s to 2008, Hovia, Jingamaya, Cliff Head, all of those wonderful little oil fields and small gas fields like Apium were discovered. And then from about 2008, no further discoveries in the Northern Perth Basin for the Dongara and Wodgina plays. But we have the discovery at Senecio 3, which found the Waitsia gas field, followed up by West Erregulla, Lockyer Deep, South Erregulla, these giant gas fields that recently been found. And we can see that suddenly this graph is shooting up with a different track, a different set of plays coming through. But this is all looking at what has been done. And the myth is about what's happening in the future. There's nothing more to find in the North Perth Basin because these explorers are really good and they found it all. Well, the reality is, if we have a look at the identified prospects and leads, so features that are yet to be drilled, and plot those up as risked prospect and lead volumes on a million barrels of oil equivalent basis, there is over 400 million barrels of oil predicted to be found in the North Perth Basin on a risked basis. This indicates that the prospect and lead inventory in the North Perth Basin is far from exhausted. There is still a lot to be discovered in the North Perth Basin. But perhaps the real question is not whether or not the North Perth Basin has run its race, but where are the next discoveries going to be found in the North Perth Basin? So where I think the next discoveries are going to be found in the North Perth Basin is to the east, closer to the Darling Fault. We had the Lockyer Deep discovery that was made this time last year on the first day of the Good Oil Conference. That's heading closer and closer to the Darling Fault. And I think that's what we're going to find with these giant gas fields. They're going to move further and further across to the east. A really interesting one is the Jurassic gas and oil play. This has been tested. It was tested by Wapit in 1971, and it discovered, but it never really flowed well until recently, when Whalering number 5 flowed at a very high flow rate, and the whole Jurassic system, based on that rediscovery, needs to be re-explored systematically. There's a great opportunity there in the central part of the Northern Perth Basin. And finally, following on from my Go West theme for oil, we have the Waitsia play, the one that has got that really high flow rate. If you follow that, instead of being on the western side of the Mountain Bridge Fault, follow that, sorry, on the eastern side, follow that across to the west. There is a huge opportunity there to look for oil that flows at really good rates. So I think they are 3 areas where there's a lot of potential in the future in the North Perth Basin. A third myth, and I love this one, is that good porosity makes for a good flow rate. Now, in the North Perth Basin, there has been recently a lot of flow tests that have flowed at incredibly high rates. And I've got the top 5 flow rates here for the last decade. Coming in on 5th at 75 million standard cubic feet a day was Whalering 5. Just pipping it for 4th place at 78 million standard cubic feet a day was South Erregulla 1. In equal second, we have West Erregulla 3 and Waitsia 4, both doing 90 million standard cubic feet a day on a well test. And far and away, the winner of the North Perth Basin flow rate stakes is Lockyer Deep at 117 million standard cubic feet a day. But we need to keep this in perspective. The world record is held by Antelope number 2, which flowed at 705 million standard cubic feet a day in Papua New Guinea. But there is a bit of this, my flow rate is bigger than yours going on in the Perth Basin amongst the companies there, or at least so it seems. And that is quite possible. But there are also, in addition to that, some very good geological and engineering reasons for flowing at the maximum possible rate for these wells. Why is the flow rate important, and why do companies get so focused on it? Flow rate is a measure simply of how quickly our gas or oil could travel from our reservoir out to our wellbore and then up into our production facility. Here's an important point. Flow rate is not determined by porosity. Porosity is simply a measure of how much oil and gas the rock or the reservoir can store. Permeability is the measure of the flow rate. And it's this permeability which connects these pore spaces that is the key function in the rocks. I've got a little diagram here on my first image here of rocks. We've got little sand grains really tightly packed together, no pore space at all. We have a non-porous, non-permeable rock which has got no storage capacity and no flow capacity. In the middle, we can see the little blue pore spaces there, but they're isolated, they're not connected. So we have our porosity, we have the storage, but we have no flow rate because it's stored but cannot get out. Then we have our third example here to the right, the rocks that geologists love to find. We have nice large pore spaces, then they're all connected. We have great storage capacity and a really good opportunity for that hydrocarbon to flow from those rocks. So why is this permeability flow rate stuff so important to a company? Well, the higher the flow rate, Essentially, the fewer the number of wells you need to have producing on a field to get to your production facilities capacity. The fewer wells you have on a field, and when wells cost between $5 to $10 million a piece, the lower capital expenditure you need to make on that field to get to your facility flow rate, which means the lower the capital expenditure, the more profit your companies are making. So flow rate is important on the economics of an oil or gas field. And generally, high porosity reservoirs have high permeabilities, but this is not always the case. We can see here, this is our line of best fit on what is the relationship between porosity and permeability in the North Perth Basin. And while it's a line of best fit, not all of our points of porosity and permeability are sitting nicely on that. And I'll just quickly explain part of this graph. This green area here is good permeability, where the permeability is greater than 10 millidarcies. Millidarcy is just a measure of how fast the rocks flow. Then we have our orange area, which is between 1 to 10 millidarcies. We're starting to get into the ugly area where it flows, but not brilliant. And then we get into the bad area, less than 1 millidarcy of permeability. And remember how I was talking about porosity being the measurement that a lot of companies talk about. If we take just one of the numbers here, 11% porosity in the North Perth Basin, we find that our permeability range, the amount that it can flow for 11% porosity, ranges between 800 millidarcies to 0.2 of a millidarcy. So at 11% porosity, what we can have in terms of our flow rate could be the good, the bad, or the ugly. We cannot tell. So just from that one number, it's a little bit confusing. And this permeability is one of the key measurements to look for in ASX releases, not the porosity. And permeability is very often not reported. So just to conclude here, we've had a look at 3 myths on the North Perth Basin. The first is that the North Perth Basin is gassy. And it's true, it is gassy. But as I said before, it is a misrepresentation of the truth. The Northern Perth Basin is gassy in areas, but there are places where the Northern Perth Basin is oily. And if you're looking for oil, those are the places you want to be at. The second myth was it's not worth investing in North Perth Basin explorers anymore because it's all been found, and let's go and have a look at some other companies. That's not the truth. It's absolutely a myth. There is still a lot more potential in the companies that are exploring for hydrocarbons in the North Perth Basin to make large discoveries for many years to come. But the key is, it's not just going to be in today's hotspots. There are a lot of new areas that have got great potential for the future. The third myth, which I just talked about, was that a good porosity measured in the world means it will flow at great rates. Absolutely a misconception. Porosity doesn't drive flow rate. Permeability drives our flow rates. However, there is some correlation between permeability and porosity. Look, I'd like to thank RIU for the opportunity to come back for a second year in a row. I really appreciate that. And I hope everyone here has a great day and you hear some really interesting talks on some great companies. Thank you, Chrissy.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Darren. Fantastic. Great start today too. I hope you enjoyed that, everyone, and got a lot out of it as well. Right, next up, our next presenter on stage won't be here on stage with us, unfortunately. He had a nasty little accident over in Texas. He has torn both of his biceps, not one, but both. It wasn't in an incident involving the gym. You can go out and have a chat with his team members, Marie and Samantha, and find out more. But so determined was he to address you all today because Blackstone had actually organised, Black Mountain Energy, had actually organised his entire trip to WA. It's the first trip he's had here to check up on Valhalla for a couple of years since COVID started, around coming and chatting with you today. They were meeting with traditional owners. They were doing all sorts of wonderful things. So he injured himself last week. Before he went into surgery, he said, I really want to do this presentation. So without the assistance of a green whistle and with his jacket, he has done the presentation for you today. So he was really passionate about getting the information across to you personally. He is very confident that once you've seen it, you want to go outside and speak to Marie and Samantha to pose any more questions to you. So without any further ado, coming up on the screen, representing Black Mountain Energy today from Texas, Executive Chairman Rhett Bennett. Let's see how he goes.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me at the Good Oil Conference. I'm the Executive Chairman, Rhett Bennett of Black Mountain Energy, ASX listed BME. We shall quickly start with a list of disclaimers, as well as we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and the custodians on the lands on which we are meeting. So a brief background on Black Mountain. I started the company in 2007. We're based in Fort Worth, Texas. All of our Black Mountain organizations have north of 350 employees. We're active across the energy space within upstream E&P, midstream, oilfield services, frac sand mining. So quite entrepreneurial. We've built and sold 9 companies since 2007. We've deployed over $1.3 billion US within those ventures. And we have a really experienced upstream team. We've operated over 19,000 wells as a group, and our team has drilled and fracked over 3,000 wells. So very experienced. And over that time frame, we've transacted over $2 billion US across numerous transactions. So really experienced group. We're quite proud of our people. A bit about our IPO fundraise on the ASX. We went out with a 40 million Aussie pre-money valuation, post-money 51 million Aussie. So we raised 11 million during the capital raise, of which we still have 8 million of cash balance. So really doing a good job being good stewards of capital as we progress the asset. We've got a wonderful board with great international shale expertise, private equity expertise, legal, operational background. So really a great board to provide guidance and help on the development of our Project Valhalla. On Project Valhalla, it's really a wonderful and differentiated asset within Australia with multiple pathways to commerciality. It's got a really strategic advantage of being in close proximity to numerous existing LNG facilities for international market access, as well as proximity to Western Australia domestic gas markets. We've got very supportive local stakeholders with our traditional owners, a relationship that we're very excited about. We've got export approval from the Western Australia government, which was a really key milestone for us in this past year. And it's a proven resource. There's been wells drilled on the acreage with gas flown to surface. So really one of the things that excited us about the project was it was less of a exploration play and more of appraisal, delineation, and development, which really dovetails quite well with our skill set. And really some of the other aspects that were quite attractive to us, really one of the main criteria was just scale, and really feels like Project Valhalla will have the ability to be a significantly impactful resource for Australia. And lastly, really excited about the prospect of having environmental approvals complete in the first half of 2023. And with that, we'll be ready to develop the asset. So on Project Valhalla, on this slide, you'll see a map of the Canning Basin, and in purple is our acreage residing within the Canning, mainly over the Fitzroy Trough, which we think is really the ideal depositional setting for potentially a unconventional resource play. And within that, the Canning Basin is a basin-centered gas system. Our acreage comprises of about 1.7 million acres. So really large footprint, 1.5 TCF of contingent resource, and over 11 TCF of prospective resource. So quite large and ultimately a multi-decade asset that we get quite excited about. And on this slide, you'll see we have numerous pathways to commerciality with pre-existing LNG facilities within close proximity, as well as access to Western Australia domestic gas markets. There's the ability to build greenfield LNG. The size of the resource could certainly substantiate it. And ultimately, a balance of serving domestic Australian gas needs as well as having access to international gas markets to develop the size resource here, I think is quite important. So we get excited about what it can mean for backfilling potential shortfalls, as you'll see in the bottom left, for whether it's East Coast or Western gas markets, the ability to backfill those and ultimately deliver lower pricing for Australians, we think is quite important. So on the pipeline options as we consider today, coming from Valhalla, really kind of coming down the Great Northern Highway towards Port Hedland and Karratha, really feels like the natural pipeline pathway, and certainly what we've been progressing our early studies on. So with that, you really have the ability to access and connect several markets along the way, and that'll give you the ability to ultimately de-risk as you go to extend your pipeline to access larger markets over time. So right now in the field, we're conducting additional 2D seismic surveys, and this slide will show you a bit about where that work's occurring, mainly in the southwest portion of the DOL, really where you want to get increased visibility and a little more granularity on the subsurface image, and ultimately that'll help you with landing zone placement and really avoiding any structural issues that may occur. So defining that will certainly be helpful for our initial drilling program, and you can see on this slide how that activity will progress with our contemplated drilling locations. On our forward development plan, you'll see we're really coming up towards the end of our EPA review and approval, ideally occurring in the first quarter of next year, certainly in the first half. 2D seismic is going on in the field right now, as we referenced, and really then you're turning the corner and more getting into drilling, ultimately delineating the asset. So that'll be kicking off in earnest in 2024, and ultimately the regulatory approvals that we'll receive in the first half of next year will really allow us to carry that development over the course of the rest of the decade. So quite excited about, once we have that, the ability to attack the resource in earnest. This slide will show you indicative well designs. Initial appraisal will include vertical wells with some heavy science, and then ultimately kicking those wells out with sidetracks and testing 1 milers on horizontals early, and ultimately long-term development will occur with 2-mile laterals when you're in efficient manufacturing mode. Our milestone roadmap really shows the progression we've made to date, and really starting in 2020 when we were lodging our referral with the EPA, and really have made tremendous progress since then, including an IPO, including the existing seismic that's occurring in the field. We've received our export exemption, and really you're getting to the point where now the fun stuff starts, and ultimately with EPA approval in Q1 of next year, the next step is drilling appraisal wells, which will kick off in earnest in 2024. This slide will show you within our land holdings, our initial DOL and the dashed box of 900,000 acres. And within that, we already have ILUAs in place with both the Warralungu and the Unigora, and really excited about their support for the project and the ability for the project to bring jobs and economic activity to the area. So quite excited to have that embrace of the local population. So in summary on Project Valhalla, it really feels like all the ingredients are there to have a world-class resource with the export exemption in hand, the ability to connect to both LNG and Western Australian gas markets, and really kind of having the right team to really exploit the assets with U.S. unconventional knowledge. It really feels like an asset that's on the precipice of really doing kind of wonderful things within Australian energy markets. So excited to lead the project and ultimately bring it into production. So we're excited about the size of the asset, the size of the prize, and ultimately think it'll be a globally relevant resource, both for Australia and international gas markets. It's a proven resource that has been drilled and flown gas to surface. And we're excited about putting our team on the asset for really pushing forward development of the asset and ultimately seeing it blossom into a great resource for Australians. Thank you all for having me here today. Wonderful to get a chance to present. Hope everybody's enjoying the conference, and we shall see you soon.
Well done. Didn't do a bad job, did he, for a bloke with 2 broken biceps under his jacket there? So he's really eager for you to get that information. And as I said, Marie and Samantha are outside at the booth, and they will have a chat with you and follow up any questions that you might have had. Next up, I've heard this clean energy producer that's about to take to the stage build as coming off a very low valuation. Pilot Energy. They're taking a lead role in WA's energy transition by leveraging its existing oil and gas assets to develop competitive clean energy through CCS, clean hydrogen and ammonia production, and integrated renewable energy generation. The gentleman here who's coming up to address us is Chairman Brad Lingo. Try and work out where he actually comes from during the course of this 15-minute presentation. Please make him very welcome, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. As I have been out here since 1993, I tell everybody I'm from very far north Queensland. So it generally gets a little bit of a chuckle. And they say, well, your accent doesn't sound like it's changed much. I said, you didn't hear what I sounded like when I got here. I sounded more like Rhett. Well, thank you very much, and thank the organizers, RIU, and the sponsors of the conference. The pilot story is not about walking away from oil and gas, but it's or running away from oil and gas. It's actually walking towards the energy transition. And we're very much focused, all of our assets are here in Western Australia, and we're very focused on an integrated development project that we refer to as the Midwest Clean Energy Project. So our compliance statements, I'm just looking forward to these actually taking 2 or 3 pages eventually after the lawyers get after it. So our key messages, we're focused on that energy transition, taking our existing oil and gas operations, both production operations and exploration assets, to produce and supply low cost, clean energy. For us, has to be both low cost and clean. Carbon capture and storage is a main plank of our plan. And carbon capture and storage, CCS, is proven safe and effective. The Cliffhead oil field, as the centerpiece of that operation, is highly suitable for a low-cost, low-risk conversion from being a mature oil production asset in the offshore North Perth Basin into a significant CCS operation. We're aiming to convert Cliffhead into being able to permanently store, inject 1 million tons per annum of CO2 for over 25 years. CCS is the key enabler of producing low-cost, clean blue hydrogen. And blue hydrogen is and will remain for the significant future significantly cheaper than green. And particularly here in Western Australia, as you would all be aware, the headlines were in the West Australian early last week about WA having the lowest gas price in the world. Integrated blue-green hydrogen production generates significant efficiencies and material cost savings. That provides us with the ability to produce, take that clean hydrogen for clean ammonia production for export into the APAC region, which is growing quite significantly. And Pilot's Midwest operations are an ideal location for this integrated development. And with the Midwest Clean Energy Project, we aim to produce the lowest cost clean energy through CCS to clean ammonia for export. So that vision, it is a vision of not walking away, as I said, running away from oil and gas, but is that taking our current operations at Cliffhead in joint venture with our partner Triangle, and transitioning and transforming those first into carbon capture and storage, and then ultimately into that integrated hydrogen and ammonia production. So it is a 3-step process. And we're looking to have the carbon capture and storage project operational in the circa 2025 timeframe. And that's really a legacy, and the ability to do that is really a legacy about the way rock oil developed the field. What many people actually don't realize is that Cliffhead, if you read the 2004 field development plan, which is still the acting controlling development plan for the field, actually refers to the project being water flood right now, which it is. And that provides a very unique set of circumstances that we refer to as an incredibly data-rich environment that allows us to know exactly how a CCS operation is going to behave. 17 years of injection history. So focusing on the project, we are one of the first two, Santos being the first, Pilot being the second, to actually have gone through the SRMS system for storage reserves and contingent resources. So we did that earlier this year, announced those results in March through certification from our subsurface consultants, CO2 Tech, which are doing a brilliant job and assisting us with making, putting together our application package for NOPTA to get hopefully the first declaration of formation application and approval under the 2006 Act. To believe that or not, the legislation and regulations have been in place since 2006, and no one's yet made an application for either a declaration of formation or an application for an injection license. So that says a little bit about the regulator and says a little bit about us. So why CCS? It is a proven technology. It is safe. It has been operating safely for 50 years. In fact, the very first CO2 capture facility was an addition to the Val Verde gas plant in West Texas. And that plant still operates today, capturing and transporting for sale 500,000 tons of CO2. And the capital cost, believe it or not, of that capture, and you can go find this information on the Global CCS Institute website, was $27 million. So a little over $1 a ton for on a capital cost basis for that project. It is permanent. As I like to say, the Cliffhead Reservoir was a warehouse for oil for millions of years, and we're going to turn it into a permanent vault for CO2. It is commercial. As I said, it's been in industrial commercial use for 50 years. It is necessary. The IPCC has estimated that the energy transition will cost us 138% more expensive without utilizing carbon capture and storage. It is the key enabler of being able to produce low carbon hydrogen and ammonia. And that low cost, if we don't have to wear the sticker shock, or we have to wear a smaller sticker shock, there's going to be a more rapid adaptation and adoption of the new energy sources. And it is essential for difficult industries. So when we talk about, a lot of people refer to the Cliffhead CCS project as being a small project. These are the top operational CCS projects in the world. And I point out the Terrell natural gas plant is that plant that was first operational since 1972. And then you look at the Enid fertilizer plant, that was the first carbon capture off an ammonia fertilizer plant when operational in 1982. Those are still existing operations. And it actually means that our target volumes for injection at Cliffhead would make it a top 10 global project on the basis of current operations. So the development pathway, first and foremost, is focused on the storage reservoir preparation, which is to effectively produce out that last remaining bit of oil. And while we're doing that, we actually are creating accommodation space for future CO2 injection. While we're doing that, using the existing platform, the existing wells, as that production tails off, we move into facilities conversion. All of this work on the facilities, all the work on the reservoir preparation has been done by our feasibility team, CO2 Tech and Technique Genesis. And the work on the facilities conversion has been done for us through our feasibility studies by Technique Genesis. So we've actually done and invested in the hard work that tells us exactly what we have to do to implement this operation. Now, what's the social impact? At injection of 500,000 tons per annum of CO2, that's the equivalent of planting 57 million trees a year. And we're going to be injecting and storing CO2 for 25 years. I just don't think you can do that year in, year out, 57 million trees. So the follow-on stage with an operational CCS project, that enables us to focus on blue hydrogen production. That blue hydrogen production, this comes out of our detailed feasibility studies that we released at the end of March this year, at a high side price of gas in the North Perth Basin. And we've been told we know there's lots of gas that's already been discovered, and there's going to be a lot more discovered. And these discoveries sit within 15 to 30 kilometers of our nominal project location. We're able to produce blue hydrogen at a cost of between $1.85 and $2.13 a kilo. That meets the Australian government's stretch target for hydrogen production in 2030. Now, why blue hydrogen? This statement out of Equinor came out of the ONS 2022 Trust Northern Seas Conference last week. And they're clearly going on the front foot as being a gas producer, one of the world's largest renewable energy generators, and a major developer of carbon capture and storage, and saying that in their estimation, that blue hydrogen will be the commanding source of hydrogen for the next 20 years. And that's at a higher gas price in the North Sea than we're talking about here in WA. Now, part of our ultimate plan is to also integrate into that overall hydrogen production facility renewables. And the enabling technology that brings the two together are the 8 Rivers clean AFC power and clean hydrogen production. But I'm going to speed up really quickly. That enables us to produce this very low cost ammonia. But the reason I'm speeding up is I want to show you our new video.
On the mid-west coast of Western Australia, approximately 270 kilometres north of Perth, an exciting new clean energy project is unfolding. ASX-listed Pilot Energy is focused on transforming its existing operations into the Midwest Clean Energy Project to deliver an integrated, cost-competitive clean energy solution. Through this project, Pilot aims to be a major contributor to reducing CO2 emissions in Western Australia and assisting Australia to meet its commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This transformation begins with converting the offshore Cliffhead oil field into a major carbon capture and storage CCS facility. This operation is expected to safely and permanently store over 1 million tonnes of CO2 emissions annually and operate for over 25 years, making the project amongst the 10 largest CCS projects currently in operation. Located 16 kilometres offshore, the Cliffhead oil field, platform and pipelines are owned by Pilot and its joint venture partner, Triangle Energy. The Cliffhead joint venture has been safely operating the offshore field and onshore plant since 2007. Recently completed engineering studies have established that the Cliffhead field and facilities are highly suitable for a low-risk conversion into a permanent CO2 storage facility. This conversion involves a straightforward repurposing of the existing platform, wells, pipelines and onshore plant to use the established oil reservoir for permanent CO2 storage. The Cliffhead storage reservoir is located under a thick regional rock seal, approximately 2 kilometres deep beneath the ocean floor, which has been a warehouse for oil for millions of years. Approaching the end of its life, oil and water production will continue until the startup of CO2 injection, when all oil production is expected to end. Located in Australian Commonwealth waters, the Cliff Head CCS project has a clear regulatory pathway for approval, and the process to secure the necessary permits and approvals has commenced. Once approvals have been obtained, Pilot will begin preparing the existing reservoir for CO2 storage and upgrading the platform, wells and pipelines for CO2 injection. Onshore, Pilot will construct a purpose-built CO2 aggregation hub, which will receive captured CO2 emissions from multiple nearby sources for injection and storage in the offshore reservoir. Providing over 1 million tonnes per annum of permanent CO2 storage is the equivalent of planting over 100 million trees each year. Pilot is also exploring the potential to provide an offshore CO2 receiving facility, capable of receiving CO2 directly offshore from conventional CO2 carriers. This would enable the project to provide permanent CO2 storage for CO2 emissions from major industrial facilities in southwest Western Australia, as well as from other sites across Australia. The Cliff Head CCS project aims to be an exciting new clean energy development for Western Australia and a major contributor to reducing Australia's CO2 emissions.
So I'll leave you with the key messages. You've heard this once before, and my time is up. Thank you very much. And we will have the video running out at the booth, and it is also available to be viewed off our company website. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brad. Cheers. Great presentation. Right. Well, did any of you make a little bit of money about a decade ago with a company called Nido? Do you remember Nido Petroleum? Anyone here? No, yeah, oh, good. Yes. Fantastic. You would have perhaps laid down a few nice bottles of Grange with your earnings from that one, I would say. This fellow here may be able to help recreate that moment for you and create something special for the rest of us, because Sagasco is resurrecting Nido, giving us the chance to potentially make some money. This man is the managing director. His name is Gary Jeffery. Would you please make him very welcome, everyone?
Thanks, Chrissy, and I couldn't have said it better. Welcome to another Good Oil Conference, and thanks for the opportunity to present this morning. Sagasco's strategy is unwaveringly in putting shareholders' funds into the ground in pursuit of energy to support the world's quest for a better quality of life. This is totally dependent on ready availability of energy. Sacgasco is of the view that oil and gas will be needed to provide reliable and necessary energy for the world's people for decades to come. In addition, I am optimistic and fundamentally of the view that higher oil and gas prices are inevitable in the short to medium term. I also believe that many governments should review their decarbonisation strategies decarbonisation-based energy strategies in light of the lessons learned from reliance on a global supply chain for energy and the consequent impact of geopolitical incidents like Ukraine and Russia. None of these lessons are new. The oil crises resulting from Middle East supply disruptions are only 40 years old. Unfortunately, world governments have a propensity to ignore those lessons in the pursuit of popularity and getting themselves re-elected. This slide gives you a succinct overview of Sacgasco and our areas of operation. North America, oil in Canada, natural gas in California, with a closer to home continuance of the Nido story, chasing oil and natural gas in the Philippines, where our first 2 wells will be drilled early next year. We're a small company, proudly living on the smell of an oily rag and nimbly seeking out overlooked opportunities in a contrarian manner. Today, I'm going to concentrate my presentation on the newest area of opportunity and growth for us, the Philippines. All of our directors have a long and close history with the Philippines. Bill Ashby is currently sailing up the coast of Palawan right now and will be resident in Manila going forward. My involvement goes back to 1973 when I was mapping what became the Semperguida discovery out on the Reed Bank in the West Philippine Sea. And Andrews goes back to the early 2000s. On top of that, we have a good local team led by Anthony Ferrer in Manila. So to quote the newly elected President Marcos on the future of the Philippines, he said, "I'm not here to talk about the past. I'm here to tell you about the future. A future of sufficiency, even plenty, of readily available ways and means to get done what really needs doing by you, by me. We do not look back, but ahead, up the road that we must take to a better place than the one we lost in the pandemic. A stronger resilience, quicker adaptability. They are the Philippines, best prevention. They are the Philippines' best protection." We strongly identify with those sentiments as the Sagasco way. Sagasco sees its role as an enabler in a new chapter in the Philippines oil and gas story, or the new chapter in the NIDO story. Sagasco is pleased to enable the NIDO operations to continue in a seamless manner, as practical, and with a renewed sense of urgency. And I repeat that, with a renewed sense of urgency. The Philippines has a new government that has signaled that it recognizes with some alarm the enormity of the energy problem. A lot of governments recognize that now. And that even large, rich nations, with their emphasis on decarbonization, do not have all the solutions to the energy problem. The Philippines government recognizes that the single most important energy supply, or their single most important energy supply, the Malampaya gas field, is depleting. The lights may soon start going out in the populous Luzon Island, and particularly Manila. And billions of dollars worth of infrastructure may lay idle in the not too distant future unless they get on with solving the problem locally. Sagasco's assets are in Malampaya's backyard. Sagasco NIDO can play a key part in the Philippines' energy supply solutions by realizing the Philippines' energy resources. The Philippines is a net energy importer, despite its relatively low per person consumption levels relative to its Southeast Asian neighbours. The country produces oil, natural gas and coal. Geothermal, hydropower and other renewable sources also account for a meaningful share of electricity generation. I've chosen on this slide a few of the key phrases from the new president of the Philippines' recent State of the Nation address, and I've chosen those to demonstrate his government's support for our efforts in the Philippines. The words in yellow talk about natural gas, and the focus on near the Malampaya field are particularly apropos, as that is our backyard. The comments about national security and national territory are also very important in the context of the territorial claims covering the West Philippine Sea, west of the Palawan. Sagasco's main goal is to unlock the stranded value that is sitting with long neglected resources in the Palawan Basin. Sagasco's priority is to conduct in-field activities leading to oil and gas production, and in doing so assists in meeting the Philippines government energy roadmap goals of greater self-sufficiency. A moot point is, does the Philippines have the assets and processes to achieve their energy goals and at the same time reward Sagasco investors for their contribution? Philippines has among the best service contracts terms in Asia, and they've shown themselves to be practical managers of their country's resources in the past, and we expect that to continue at greater pace into the future. The early production phase involving extended well tests compensate the contractor, us, for taking a risk to determine the likely economic outcomes from oil production, particularly in smaller fields. Sacgasco Nido is developing alliances with Blue Sky Resources and its associates and other service providers in the region. These service providers have been selected because they're adept at small field developments. We are doing this in order to increase our chance of successfully redeveloping older remnant oil resources and reserves like at Cadlao and West Lenapakan. This in turn will put Sacgasco and its partners in a great position to drill and develop adjacent prospects like Nandino and East Cadlao. This diagram illustrates some of those opportunities. Our focus for earliest drilling are Cadlao and Nandino. We have previously published a lot of details on these opportunities, and those details are available for review via the ASX platform and our website. And come talk to me if you want to hear more about them. Today, I will limit my observations to independently reviewed resources. The Cadlao oilfield redevelopment with gross contingent resources of 6 million barrels of oil recoverable on a 2C basis. And at the Nandino prospect, is it exploration or appraisal? Given that Sacgasco will be drilling the Nandino Nido limestone reservoir closure up dip from oil discoveries at Tindalo, McCaul, Nido 1X1 and North Nido. These ones down in here. The assessed prospective resources in Nandino are 27 million recoverable barrels of oil on a mean basis. Opportunities also exist at West Lenapakan A and B for redevelopment of West Lenapakan A and new development of West Lenapakan B. I will allow you to chase up the Cadlao and Nandino and other details offline, and now move on to the oil and gas elephant country in SC58. Nido Service Contract 58 covers a massive area and exhibits huge potential for oil and gas. Independent third-party assessments published by Nido in the past have identified billions of barrels of oil and gas and oil equivalent in natural gas as prospective resources in and around SC58. These resources are mapped in multiple prospects with up to 4 or more vertically stacked potential sandstone and limestone reservoirs in structural and stratigraphic closures akin to those that have been prolifically productive offshore West Borneo. It behooves the Philippines government to clarify the terms of access to SC58 and similar areas of prospectivity if the Philippines are to move towards self-sufficiency in oil and gas derived energy. We again take encouragement from the new president's sentiments on sovereignty so clearly expressed in the recent State of the Nation address, which we saw earlier on. To labour the point a little, I've enlarged the area around the depleting Malampire gas field to clearly demonstrate that Sacgasco Nido assets are in the present Malampire focus area. Our huge Baldinia prospect is just 40 kilometres west of Malampire facilities and the start of the gas pipeline, which is currently underutilised and becoming more so, to Manila. Each of the teal blobs and the are very on this SC58 are very prospective prospects in SC58. So let's wrap this up with my elevator pitch. Sacgasco could be an important part of an investor's portfolio. We provide upside in the Philippines, where there has been a historical discovery rate of 45% offshore the Palawan, and the targets are pretty shallow. Then there are the planned upcoming wells and extended well tests at Cadlao and Nandino, not to forget about the other 5 discovered oil fields and associated follow-on prospects, all on 3D seismic. And the elephantine prospective resources in SC58, with too many zeros to count on my hands, are very, very prospective. These are underpinned by cash flow from Sacgasco's 450 barrels of oil equivalent per day of oil and gas production, 86% of which is oil in Alberta, Canada, and we have proved and probable reserves of 2.4 million BOE, predominantly oil in Canada as well. So Sagasco is currently operating in an environment of opportunity, courtesy of higher, fundamentally driven oil and gas price regimes. Moreover, we have the diversification without having too many projects to be distracted. So if you want to know more, come see me. I'm going to close with a short video of our weapon of choice to prove up the Philippines oil and gas resources. The services of the deep venture drill ship have been procured through the efforts of joint venturer Blue Sky Resources. The DP2 deep drill ship Deep Venture is being prepared in Vung Tau, Vietnam, for drilling in action in the Philippines. The drill ship provides flexibility for Philippines operations that can drill in water depths ranging from 80 to 150 meters and all the way up to 1,300 and even greater with the addition of some riser. And that gives it a lot of flexibility for our assets, which range across those water depths. Blue Sky is Sagasco's like-minded operator in Canada, our joint venture participant in the Philippines, and SGC's second largest and substantial, as of yesterday, shareholder. You cannot get much more aligned than that if you want to seek blue skies in the oil and gas business. Thank you.
Interesting, isn't it? Could mean something for us. I should have reminded everyone to turn off their phones on the way in today, and I didn't, so my apologies. If you can turn your phones off, that would be great. Next on stage, next on the RIU stage, we're being joined by a man who's going to tell us a little story about a world-class asset that's currently entering uncharted waters in a desperately energy-hungry environment. Nick de Blocq has travelled from his base in South Africa. So passionate is he about this to talk with us today. Let's give him a really warm welcome as he joins us to tell us why we should join him in his passion for the potential of Kinetico Energy. Please make him welcome.
Well, thank you. I find myself in uncharted waters, actually being the only person in the room without an accent this morning, but let's see how we go. Actually, it's a nice balance right now, isn't it? I think the Springboks and Wallabies have won a game each in the last 2 weeks. Let's see if you can hold your own in the next couple of weeks against the All Blacks. Go for it. Let's put some context on what we're doing, and where we're from and why this is so. So the term exciting can be used quite flippantly these days, but I think, what we've got going here is more like a cardio exercise. there's a monopoly electricity supply commission in South Africa called Eskom, who've been really poorly managed in the past couple of decades in terms of maintenance and replacement. And there's a lot of it that's falling over. Supply is in short demand, great demand and short supply. And we have what's called load shedding down there, which is a planned sort of rolling blackout where you can get, you without power multiple hours, multiple times a day, it gets that bad. Renewables are being asked to man up. We've got a lot of wind and solar energy to the tune of about 7,000 megawatts in South Africa. But at their very, very best, when they're asked to man up and take a position and participate in the solution, the best they've been able to give us, the very best, is about 1.4 or so, say 20% of their installed capacity. So it's going to be a while before that becomes a substantial solution as well. The only onshore gas supplied into the South African context right now is out of Mozambique, the Pandi Temani fields, supplying Sasol in Secunda, who I'll speak a little bit more about them shortly because they're a major part of our story. But in a year or two, look, they've been producing from those fields there for about 3 decades now, and that's old for a gas field. They're about to peak over and decline. They know that. They are sniffing around the entire sub-region to replace that resource. And this graph here I'm showing is from the government themselves. Their prediction of the need for gas over the next few years. In a decade or so, it could easily be up by about 400% versus today. It's massive. Most of it naturally in the power spectrum, but all of them, vehicular, thermal industry, etc. They're all set to raise their requirements from gas. This is a little bit of a comparison chart. Now, we've been called world class, and I think this drives the statement. 4.92C at the moment. TCF, that's a number that's going to grow, by the way. When I show you our map shortly, I'll explain why. There's a big chunk of about 2,300 square kilometers to add to our existing about 4,500 square kilometers under rights that we're going to be adding. And the resource within that part of our acreage is going to jump that number up to, you pick a number, I'm not going to tell you. The comparatives are down there for good reason. Just to show eventually, when I come to another slide in a couple of slides time, why we believe we are valuably undervalued right now. It explains why it's a very, very good time to climb in. Good. Right, this is where we are. If you look at this map, our assets under license are in here. This entire region here, ER 320, 2,383 square kilometers is under application. Once that's added, we're going to have pretty much close to 7,000 square kilometers under rights. I've looked it up, trust me, it's bigger than 36 countries on the planet. It's almost a full 10% of the Mpumalanga province that we have under rights at the moment. To give you some context as well, geographically, Johannesburg's up here. Not working too well, but and Durban down this side, if you like, Mozambique over that side. We have 30 holes in the ground right now, 23 core wells, 7 pilot production wells, and every single one of them has cut gas. I don't know how many of you guys out there know of other companies with 100% strike rate. There's a great coconut shy going on. Every time we sink a hole in the ground, right across our acreage, we're finding gas. There's a heck of a lot of it down there. Recently, we drilled a 3-well program to add to 2 existing wells called the Korhan cluster in honor of the blue Korhan. I'm an environmentalist. I like birds. And the blue Korhan I'm honoring with this cluster of wells in terms of nomenclature. And we've confirmed some good commercial rates out of that. We had 1 well that's not yet commercial. It's fixable, maybe with some slant drilling, but it's enough to drive a gas to power project, a small one, which I'll explain shortly. The second last point there, to spud in September, yesterday, as I left here, I got the approval from PASA, the Petroleum Agency, the regulator, to drill a core hole right next to the Majuba power station, which is about there, within about 4.5 kilometers of Majuba. In fact, they approved 2 sites, so we can choose. We've got our sights on one of them at the moment. Now, the last point there, the IDC, the Industrial Development Corporation, this is institutional money. This is the government's investment body, all right? So this is the government showing their confidence and their interest in what we're doing. We've already formed an SPV. We have main shareholder agreements signed up. Everything's in place. And these guys are going to participate in approximately 20 wells-ish. This is, more or less what we expect to produce the ring-fenced scope for this SPV. And they have the ability to participate in about another 60, 80 wells or so as we go forward. The government has more recently, right from the top, right from the president's office through the ministry, added a lot of gas to their commentary, their narrative when they talk about energy in South Africa. Look, they've had to. They've been so coal-centric for various reasons. And every time they talk about energy now, they talk about a mix that includes a lot of gas. We have an independent power producers office now, the IPP. They recently put out a document for comment that allows 3,000 megawatts of power to add to a previous 3,000 megawatts that they asked for a few years ago through the RIPP. And this is all very exciting for us, of course. They've also allowed municipalities to procure their own gas, their own energy, sorry. Cape Town started, Johannesburg is following. At the end of October, a lot of people are answering RFQs to supply municipalities with power. And we've had a knock on the door for 100 megawatts, bang, and I was like, dude, this is, you're talking about 300-400 wells here. The guy didn't even blink. He said, how much do you want? These people, the market is coming to us and they are offering to put skin in the game. We're probably going to drill a lot of wells with other people's money. It's kind of good. The market penetration goes on. I've mentioned power. Power is a no-brainer. Our partners at Vutomi are going to be bringing a generator to site. We're going to start small, just a proof of concept. We're first going to prove that our gas can drive their generator. Then we're going to link it to the grid. We're going to do just 1 megawatt, okay? This is proof of concept. It's not a business, but we'll build it up from there. I'll be drilling more approved wells that we have sites for in that same area, increase the cluster, increase the gas flow, take it up to 5 megawatts. You're starting a business around about then. All right, but if you can do a megawatt with 3 or 4 wells, it's a mental scalability concept, isn't it? What can you do with 300 or 400 or 3,000 or 4,000? That's the way it's going to develop. We've been, of course, approached by a lot of people in the LNG game, desperate for the gas for their thermal industry clients. They brought the market to us. They are willing to put money in all phases, upstream, midstream, downstream, bring the infrastructure to us, and they just want our gas. I have what I call a nice problem. It is a problem, though. It's a nice problem, but I have this burgeoning production environment going on. It's actually, you can see it hopping from outer space, and I've got this exploration effort that we need to do to catch up with the product, with the production, with the market, and it does take money. Obviously, we got to get holes in the ground. So what are we doing right now? Obtaining maiden gas reserves. So it's a natural progression from the resource. We're getting reserves. We've engaged with Sproul already. We're expecting a report at the end of October, early November, perhaps. That'll just be the startup, and that's based entirely on but one project, which is the gas to power I've talked about already with Vutomi. The exploration continues. I've got 7 wells to drill during the rest of this year. 7 holes, I'm sorry, they'll be core holes. Starting immediately with spudding within days near the Majuba power station. And three in each of blocks 270 at the north, right next to Sasol's Secunda plant. And in the south, where we're expecting deeper geology, it all dips as you go south, and we're getting another 200, 250 meters out of our wells. By the way, the average pay zone that we're cutting per well that we've drilled is over 100 meters. That's pretty cool. We are merging with our current partners in South Africa to become the 100% owner of the rights holder, which is Afro Energy. Everything is concluded. All the regulatory stuff is in hand. We have signatures from the minister, from the Reserve Bank, from Revenue Services, and it's only stakeholder approval required, which is a formality. Our chairman, Adam's going to be calling a meeting in the near future. So yes, we obviously are in a great position to help the decarbonization efforts in South Africa. ESG, wow. As I've said earlier, I have an environmentalist hat on my head at the same time as a gas man's hat. The two are not in conflict because we're doing it all correctly. We have a great supplier in the form of SLR who keeps us honest, keeps us on our toes, reports the environmental aspects of our operation to pass it to the regulator. We all have a great relationship. We all have the same ideals. We are not a fracking company. We are getting our gas out of shallow sandstones, not deep shales. The geology doesn't allow for hydraulic fracturing. Our agreements with the landowners are packed with environmental obligations, and we keep every one of them religiously. Localization too. I'm a great believer in those who know me in South Africa know me as a promoter of localization, local content, local procurement, right down to the farms where we're working on. If we need gravel, we need plant, we talk to the farmers first. We talk to the local communities about commodities, about security services, about transport, about everything that we can get from them locally. We go ahead and procure as local as we can. It also gives me a good reason to be a rand-based cost company. Look, this is dated last Wednesday. The chairman and I went to Sydney last week, and when we came back, this was almost double. This entire top line here was almost double. We bounced off about 11 or 12. It's been a little bit of selling. We settled back to about 9 odd cents at the moment today. You'll have to look. I'm not sure. Market cap goes up to about 60 from 40. It's all good news. It's all good direction. This graph is going to look very different if we were to put it up, to replot it today. The problem, before you start shouting at me, what the problem is, the cash in the bank, it's reasonably low. That's being solved as we speak. And by the way, it's going to be solved with South African rand. We have substantial parties in South Africa that are ready to throw money into the bank for us to help us to get these wells in the ground that we have to do for this exploration effort to catch up to the demand for the gas. You can come talk to us a bit later about that if you like. The chairman and I will be at the booth all day. And as we close off, just the line items that we intend to do in the next few weeks and months. This is not years, this is weeks and months. As I've said, the exploration, we've got the wells to do, the core holes, I believe. The gas to power project, the generator is going to be arriving on site pretty soon, and we're going to start this proof of concept. The merger completion, I've explained, we're taking over, we're absorbing our partner company in South Africa. We're going to own the asset in South Africa 100% as Kinetico Energy. The reserves growth, naturally, our maiden reserves are being worked on right now. We're evolving. That's just the first of many. Every time we sign up MOUs and gas sales contracts, the renewals are going to show step increases in our reserves. The IDC showing the government confidence in what we're doing. They're putting money in so we can get holes in the ground. They're going to get some of the production, or by all means, no problem. And this is all going to happen, as I said, probably within the scope of this year. So I don't know if I'm in time, out of time, but we're actually right on. Read that at your leisure. And there's my blue Quran. I had to show him to you. Thank you.
That's your birds that you're passionate about, correct? Go and have a chat with him afterwards. Good bloke. And then ask him about his former singing career at pubs as well in South Africa. Not just birds, he's got some hidden talents. Right, analysts have touted our next junior gas explorer here at RIU, one of the better energy companies on the East Coast. McCaul is Managing Director of Comet Ridge, and he's here to provide an overview of Comet Ridge's Mahalo gas hub and its significance to the East Coast gas market. So you got to watch those South Africans. You want to take our 40 bits and then take our clickers. Right, so you got that? So we keep hearing that this gas shortage on the East Coast is going to persist. So is Comet Ridge going to be a long-term prospective opportunity that you're going to want to add to your portfolio? Would you make Tor very welcome, please, everyone?
Thanks, Christina. Morning, everybody. Just before I start, we are in a trading halt for fundraising, and the only way I can come up here is I've had to promise my COSEC in blood that I'm not going to say any more than that. So we'll just focus on the business, and we'll just let the the fundraising go through the halt today. So just before I start too, I'm one of two people here from Comet Ridge. Sean Scott's here, who's one of our non-execs. Sean's also chairman of Noble Helium, so you'll hear from Noble Helium later. Sean, some of you or a lot of you will know from his days as CEO at Arrow. So if you can't grab me and you want to talk Comet Ridge, Sean's here as well. So I've only got 10 slides on Comet. I've got 2 on the market, which are sacrificial. I think everyone here knows what the East Coast market's doing, and if we don't get to them, we don't get to them. Just to sort of set the scene, the light grey boxes here are the petroleum leases. This is where most of Queensland's gas production comes from. Arrow, Santos, Origin, APLNG, QGC. Our position at Mahalo is just north of that area in the orange. I won't talk about Galilee today in the northwest. That's a separate topic for a separate time. It's got very large potential, but our focus at Comet Ridge is squarely on bringing Mahalo into production, and I'll run you through how we plan to do that. Normal disclaimer about forward-looking statements and past performance. In terms of highlights, probably the biggest 3, I'll let you read some of the slides, and I'll concentrate on the maps and just to hit the highlights. But probably the biggest 3 things we've achieved in the last year or 2, we've managed to have APLNG Origin exit our Mahalo project. They were amongst the 3 parties, them and Santos and Comet. They were the most covered for gas. They've had a purple patch with gas production. Our concern was that they may push Mahalo FID back. We went to them in the depths of COVID and started talking to them about buying them out, and that whole process took about 2 years and 3 months, and we settled that on the 28th of June. The second piece that's been really significant for us is the Queensland Government had the kindness or the good sense to award us 3 blocks across the north of the Mahalo JV block, which we bid at 100%. So strategically, Queensland Government really helped us to cement our footprint and expand our footprint, and I'll show you a map on that. And the final thing that's really significant is in one of these blocks, these 100% blocks, we drilled a well in October last year. We completed it in December. We started pilot testing in January. By April, we were producing gas. We'd started to dewater it effectively, and we recently just shut it in as it passed through and went past 1.7 million cubic feet a day. And I'll show you a slide on that as well. So in terms of corporate overview, this is a Monday slide, 22.5 cents. Yesterday, we closed 24.5 cents. And as I said today, we've halted. The debt piece of that is probably the most interesting. We put a loan, a debt facility in place last year with Pure Asset Management that was warrants backed. We drew down 6.5 of that last year, 3.5 this year, so that's 10. The other 13 is actually from Santos. So as part of this APLNG transaction, we were able to get Santos to loan us $13 million for that. That gives Santos an option to take some of that equity that we got, the 30% that we got from Origin APLNG, and Santos have until 28th of December to do that. And in this gas market, we fully expect them to exercise their option. Once Santos do, 5 million of that debt goes away, because 5 million of that is their allocated share, if you like, of the acquisition price. In terms of project overview, the map on the right is the Mahalo hub area. So the southern part of it, the funny shaped square box with the 2-tone grey, is the original JV block. Comet Ridge has been in there for a long time. We've been 40%, Santos 30%, and Origin rolled their share into APLNG a few years ago. So that's partly owned by Origin, Kinetico and Sinopec. So we've had a really good quality asset. We've had a joint venture that from the outside looking in looked blocked. And so what we've been able to do is negotiate with Origin APLNG for the price of $20 million for 12 million upfront and 8 trailing. We've been able to buy them out to take those reserves onto our books, and we paid 25 cents a gigajoule for those reserves. So we think it's probably the best East Coast gas deal that's happened for a long time. And we're able to set that price in 2020 before the market went silly over the last 12 months or so. So we now have, on top of that, our last 3 block wins we've been able to win, and they're those 3 big areas across to the north. ATP 2048, 61 and 63. So in addition to about 989 square kilometres of Mahalo JV block, we now have another 885 square kilometres of 100%. Santos has an unfirm option to enter 2 of those blocks. So as part of our transaction, I'll run you through, Santos has a firm option to increase into Mahalo up to 43% and an unfirm option yet to be negotiated to be done at commercial terms with Comet for entry into the northern blocks. It's an exciting piece of acreage. It's 240 kilometres just to the west of Gladstone. It's got a 6-inch small diameter line just to the west of us. Denison Gas owns that. We're talking to Denison Gas about pipeline access, and we believe we can get a quick 10 or 12 terajoules a day away into that purple line to the west. It's also got Santos's GLNG line, and it's got Gemina's 12-inch domestic line into Gladstone, 65 k's to the south, which is the same sort of distance that Ian Davies and the Senex team tied in with their Atlas project. So it's got a good address. It's in Queensland, which is really open for business for gas and has been for the last 60 years. And so we're very excited to be a big part of this. Right now, the equity lays or sits largely with us. We're 100% across the north. We're 70% in the southern part with Santos at 30. And once Santos, we believe, exercise their option, we'll drop down to 57%. So we've got a big footprint over this area. In terms of the path to production, I've mentioned there just in the top line, the hub, what we call a Mahalo hub, is the JV part with Santos, 100% blocks to the north. This area will become a big production area that's significant for East Coast. We've already got 266 gross PJs of 2P booked in the JV block. We've done nothing yet in terms of booking. Not that we haven't done the work. We haven't landed the booking yet on the 2P, 3P reserves in that northern block to the northwest, but we expect that over the next several weeks. So that'll be our first booking up into the 100% blocks. And even the 266 and in the southern part and the JV block is worth 60 TJs for about a dozen years. We're targeting those new reserves very soon. We've had Queensland government approval. We've got 2 environmental approvals and Queensland government approval to develop the southern part. And we've got an engaged and experienced operator with Santos. And as I mentioned, we're looking at commercialising in a short timetable to the west at a small flow rate. And then the plan with Santos is to work into a bigger project where we put a bigger plant in the centre and we drain gas into the centre and export from the centre. In terms of the easiest way to look at certified 2P and 3P is in the bar graph. As it stands right now, probably the most interesting one is the one on the left because that's the 2P and that's what a customer will sign up to buy. So beside that, 3P and then we get 1C, 2C, 3C. So the top of the bar graph right now is what Comet Ridge physically holds as a 70% holder. The blue piece is the piece we expect Santos to take before Christmas time when they exercise their option, and Santos will move up from 30 to 43 and we will move down from 70 to 57. That's the firm option 1 that Santos has. Any further movement for Santos beyond the 43% or any movement into the northern blocks is yet to be agreed and negotiated on commercial terms. So what you see there is just in the southern JV part, for Comet Ridge at the moment, 2P plus 2C of a little over 400, and we fully expect that to drop to about 330 when Santos exercises, and then we'll be looking to add to that over the next several weeks where we start to book 2P and 3P up in the northwest. This is probably one of my favourite maps. This is our high quality fairway in the green. The Mahalo JV block is the southern part. The new blocks we've won are the northern part. Two out of 3 of these northern blocks, we actually wrote to Queensland government and asked them to gazette. And so they were put in their routine bidding rounds. We first won the northwest block, and there's no information really available on who else bid. But if you round up the sort of scuttlebutt on the streets of Brisbane, we think there were probably about 10 bidders for that northwest block. So we were quite pleased to win that. We then subsequently, the year after, went and won the next 2 blocks further across to the east. And the far east block has been cut off. It runs a long way north, but for the purposes of the fairway, we've cut that off. So the green high quality fairway is effectively, the mining analogy is the high grade ore area. It's where the coals are less than about 350 metres deep. And that's where we've put pilots. We've got really good results on pilot testing, and we've got high flow rates. And I'll show you the Mahalo North well that we've just drilled is these two little dots here. We also had a successful pilot about 4 kilometres away at Mahalo with the JV, and we had another successful pilot at Myra, and the distance from Myra to Mahalo North is about 15 kilometres. So we've established a good size sweet spot. Myra itself was the highest flow rate in the hub or in the area at 1.4 million scuffs a day. We've just exceeded that with Mahalo North at 1.7, and I've got a flare photo coming for you. So that's really where we want to play. There's a lot of gas in place to the south of us in these PCA areas. In these potential commercial areas, there's a lot of gas in place there. It gets a little deeper and tighter, and the development for them will be further out into the future, where we look at triple lateral wells. You drill a trident well or a well that looks like a chicken foot, get 2,000 metre sections in each path, and you end up with 6,000 metres of coal in the well. So even the tighter stuff can be really effectively drained if you make the well big and ugly enough to do that. The last point on this, I guess, is that this is a very friendly gas in the ground in terms of H2S with none and CO2 at less than 2%. So we've got a gas stream that we can bring to surface. We don't need any fancy metallurgy. We don't need stainless. We don't need amine, or we don't need to remove any impurities. We simply dehydrate this through a glycol tower and it goes in the pipeline. So very, very simple to process. That's a flare photo. I was out. They don't let me out on the well much because I tend to tinker with things, and so I'm sort of been banned from that a little bit. But I did take that photo a couple of weeks ago. That was getting towards 1.7 million before we shut the well in. You can see water tanks in the background. We think this is a world-class result. We went round the board and the senior team at Comet Ridge, and there's a lot of accumulated experience in CSG there back to the 90s, and none of us can remember a single pilot well like this producing at this sort of flow rate. There are pilots that produce these rates. We managed to get 1.4 from Myra, but it had 4 vertical wells around that had been helping dewater and drop the pressure in the seam. This well's done all this heavy lifting all by itself. So we've sort of jokingly started to call it the unicorn. It exists in mythology only. But it's a great result. The modelling we did last year showed us it would do this. We were able to remove enough water to get this sort of flow rate, and the water was doing exactly what we thought it should do towards the end. You start with high water rates. Very quickly, as the gas rate comes up, the water rate comes down. That's the well we drilled. We drill the vertical first. We do all the evaluation in the vertical well. So we take coal to the lab. We run our logs. We run technical people. We run MDT, Schlumberger's MDT. So we get perm and we get a sense of what the quality of the zone is. The scanning log tells us big, fat, wide open fractures. We then move the rig 440 metres. We drill the first lateral. And then we pull back and we drill the second. So we've got almost 1,900 metres of coal in that well. And this is the development style. Work out your fracture direction, get perpendicular to your fractures. There's no other stimulation. And we were losing 102 barrels an hour while we drill this towards the end. So this is very permeable coal. The point here is that had this had some friends, if it had nearby wells dewatering around it, as you would in development, it would have done this, would have done higher rate, and it would have done it quicker. In terms of the JV project, we talked about that. This is the firm option that Santos has to go from 30 to 43%. There's yet to be negotiated options beyond that and entry into the northern blocks. Santos are very commercially engaged to actually lend us $13 million. We're quite pleased that they plugged into the project. And also in that Southern JV block, we've got reserves in place. We've demonstrated flows. We've got our approvals, and really it's now just roll through FEED and go to FID next year. Just 2 slides to finish on the market. The ACCC publishes these regularly. I think we all see them. The short story is that there's a gap. And someone's going to need to fill that gap. We think Queensland's the place for it. Victoria seems to have a formal moratorium. New South Wales seems to have an informal moratorium. Northern Territory seems bureaucratic to us. Queensland, we can get stuff done very quickly. And then last one is pricing. If it'll go, yeah, this is another ACCC slide. It shows that prices are up. I don't think any of us expect them to stay this high forever. They will come back a little bit, but I think structurally, the gas market on the East Coast has shifted. So thank you very much.
Cheers. Thanks, Tom. Bit of a hard one today to do that presentation. I'm going to ask Darren a question. You mentioned unicorns. What did you say about myths?
Yeah, look, you do find them occasionally. And unicorn wells are wonderful things. That's what Wake Series and Comet Ridge have got one as well.
That came from you, not from him. Okay, good. Actually, I'm going to talk about you again with our next presenter too, because something you said there, it's your little, we're going to your little world of passion to round out this. You'll be very happy down the front here. So we're moving to the Perth Basin. So our final presenter in this first session of day 2 has been very, very busy since December last year. Lots of coverage, which may explain why so many of you have packed into the back of the room for this particular session. There was a very interesting development in the last few days, which some of you may choose to take advantage of after this presentation. Stuart Nicholls, do you want to come up and join us, sir? He is joining us in his capacity as CEO and MD of Strike Energy Ltd, which is a $600 million ASX 300 gas fertiliser and renewables developer in your favourite basin, Dr. Ferdinando, the Perth Basin. The reports will tell us its run of recent success is brought about through its mix of assets, people, strategy, and culture. Perhaps something to round off your list of potential investment opportunities this morning. Please make him welcome.
Sure. Hi, everybody. And as you heard in the very kind introduction, Strike is a ASX 300 listed net zero 2030 integrated gas, renewables and fertiliser developer. We're in the Perth Basin. We are taking our enormous natural gas endowment and we're taking that as far down the value chain as we can, through down to fertiliser, where we're accessing global gas pricing and a global gas market. But we've got here through the back of about 4 years of very hard work in the Perth Basin, where we put together 7 consecutive successful exploration and appraisal wells that have made 4 gas discoveries. We've got 4 gas fields with contingent resources and reserves booked across that. We've taken FID on our first development at Walyering. We'll be in cash flows next year. We'll be looking to take FID on a $3.5 billion fertiliser plant at the end of next year. And as we move into the next couple of years from there, we'll be growing our cash flows in the domestic gas business. Strike is ultimately looking to be producing about 15% of WA's domestic gas by the end of 2025. And also by 2027, we'll be producing about $1.2 billion worth of fertiliser every year. So it's a pretty exciting journey that we've come from and one that we're going through. And I think what you can do is you can take the track record of success of high degree difficulty situations that my management team and the board of Strike have put together and been able to navigate and look at our path forward. Yes, it is a complex one. It is one that is difficult, but it's a team that is showing exactly that they're capable of being able to make that transition. We are a business that effectively has built a strategy off a very large gas position in the Perth Basin. We're sitting on 3,500 square kilometres of prime acreage across 2 different plays, the Permian play in the north and the Jurassic play in the south. We have 4 gas discoveries between West Erregulla, South Erregulla, Ocean Hill and Walyering. We've got 1 that's in FID. We've got another one that's coming through, and our gas resources and reserves at South Erregulla are on their way to unlocking the FID at Project Tabor. It is a very integrated story, and that's because we are in a state that currently has an export ban for onshore gas in Western Australia. So there's a lot of method in the madness of going down the degree of difficulty for Project Tabor, but I'll take you a little bit through that later on. And then last but not least, we've also acquired 100% of the geothermal rights over the existing geothermal rights over the Perth Basin. And that's because we can take our core skills of mapping subsurface environments and putting holes and stuff, and we can actually see a point in time in the latter part of this decade where we're using those skills to develop synchronous dispatchable renewable energy into the grid, where the state is looking to exit coal-fired power and ultimately decarbonise themselves towards their own net zero commitment. But really the core of the value of the company sits in an area we call Greater Erregulla, where Strike is operator across all of its own permits. We've had, as I said before, a really great run of success there, and you can see the well results between West Erregulla 2 to 5, and then South Erregulla 1, where we made 2 gas discoveries, where there is another gas discovery that will be flow tested in the next week or so in the Wodgina horizon. But this is a region that is showing that it is incredibly consistent. That that the net pay is consistent, that the results of the wells, the productivity of the wells are really, really good. This is gas that can compete with Qatar, Russia, and America. This is gas that has a lifting cost of about 20 cents a gigajoule, and ultimately a full development cost of a bit over 50 cents a gigajoule. And that makes for a very interesting resource base to underpin value-added manufacturing here in Western Australia. When we look at the existing results of our wells and what we've currently got on the books, Strike is one of the largest reserve holders in the Perth Basin. And within, after we complete the independent certification of the South Erregulla gas discoveries and book our 2P and 2C resources there, I'm confident Strike is on track to be the largest reserve holder in the Perth Basin, which is a really exciting place to be. And it shows the results of the hard work that the company has put down over a period of really low activity in our industry. When 2020 and the headwinds of COVID came in, Strike lent into those. We put a rig on long-term contract. We continued to drill through the downturn, and we're coming back out into an environment where gas pricing is on the rise, where the access to undeveloped reserves is low, with a very large reserve base as a result of that decision to put that rig on a long-term contract and drill up a lot of our portfolio. But what you can also see is the upside in our resources. We have a 360 BCF of independently certified 2C resources at Ocean Hill, which has gone through a higher degree of certainty coming off the back of the success of the Walyering appraisal wells. And when we look at what that means in terms of the last major transaction that occurred in the basin, which was the acquisition of AWE by Mitsui in 2018, gas pricing was around $3.70. They've had $1.20 a gigajoule for in-ground 2P and 58 cents a gigajoule for 2P 2C. We translate that into a gas environment that we see today, where the gas price is on the rise to about a spot price close to about $6, term pricing closer to $8. And that means that in-ground gas is currently worth about $2 a gigajoule for reserves, and about just under $1 for 2P 2C. Good news for us is we're headed towards cash flow. And I think one of the art of running a little small business like this over the 5.5 years that I've been the CEO at Strike is getting it to its maiden cash flows. And we're very fortunate that we have had a good amount of success at the Walyering gas field. Discovered in 1971, it's only taken 52 years for the appropriate amount of appraisal to occur here, where the success at Walyering 5, a well that flowed at 75 million standard cubic feet a day with 8 barrels of condensate per million standard cubic feet, followed up by Walyering 6, another 35 million standard cubic feet with around 10 barrels per million standard cubic feet of condensate. It's only $14 million to bring this guy online because it sits adjacent to the Parmelia gas pipeline, where Wappet was successful in the 1971 with the Walyering 1 well, and they diverted the pipeline directly to it. So we're very fortunate. We don't have a big offshore field or a complex, deep, sour field that's requiring Strike to go on that difficult journey from developer or explorer to developer to producer. We have literally some wells that we can almost hook directly up to the pipeline. There is no impurities in this gas stream. It's incredibly cheap. It'll be one of the highest yielding, highest IRR gas projects developed in Australia of all time, because because gas pricing is so high and the cost of the development is so low. $14.4 million gross to bring it online. Strike 55% an operator, so $7.9 million our share. Wells already in the ground. Pretty exciting place to be at this point, at this juncture. And because we've had this success in our gas business, we're able to sort of look a bit beyond that. One of our core cultural focuses is how far into the future we are willing to look. We have gas fields that have 10 to 20 to almost 30 years of life to ultimately deplete those. Relying on gas markets as you know them today is a a decision fraught with difficulty and monetization options late in that period of time. By linking our energy to food through the manufacturing of fertilizers, we will institutionalize ourselves here in Australia, and particularly in Western Australia, as a key deliverer of a core commodity that ultimately underpins the population, and that is nitrogen-based fertilizer. Effectively, it's solid gas. 70% of the cost of a ton of urea is linked to its natural gas. But why are we doing it? We're doing it for a few reasons. We're currently in a state where there is an export ban on onshore gas. And so we're using our integration into fertilizers to access a global gas price market. Urea is priced predominantly linked to its natural gas feedstock. And you can see the bar chart on the right-hand side, the difference between spot gas pricing, term gas pricing in Western Australia, and the 3.5 times uplift you will get if you turn your gas into urea. You'll get gas pricing that's equivalent to about $36 a gigajoule Australian. It's not quite the 60-something dollars you'd get in the spot market if you had turned it into LNG, but it goes a long way. It also means that we don't have to deal with the cartel of buyers in Western Australia and also the cartel of suppliers. 85% of Western Australia's domestic gas is produced by 3 companies. 85% of WA's domestic gas is bought by 8 companies. If you are relying on 3 decades of gas to be monetized into a market of that size and shape, it is fraught with difficulty. You will always be a price taker, never a price maker. And by virtue of accessing urea markets, we are accessing a larger, more flexible market where we can link our natural resource endowment to international pricing. We can also use our carbon in the manufacturing of urea. We can take a TCF's worth of gas and put that carbon into a value add. It's not an offset, it's not an emission, it's not a cost, it's not a byproduct. It is actually a value add to our natural gas that ultimately leads to reaching that pricing outcome. And the last one, which is also something to point out, we will be building the largest hydrogen producing and consuming facility at Project Haber. It will produce and consume around 840,000 tons of ammonia, which is 140,000 tons per annum of hydrogen. That means that we are building a piece of infrastructure using our natural gas endowment today that can be decarbonised over the next coming decades as green hydrogen becomes more technically and commercially feasible. But we'll be making our hydrogen at 50 cents a kilogram, not at $8 a kilogram. So, we're in a really great place between now and then. Just a little bit about urea markets. Australia is an enormous urea consumer based on our sandy soils. Urea is the primary way of getting nitrogen into our soils. It's the lowest carbon, lowest cost way of putting nitrogen into crops in Australia. We're a big cropping nation. Over the last 12 months between 2020 and 2021, urea consumption grew in Australia by about 20%. And that's because we got some good weather across the East Coast and the West Coast. In the last 12 months, I expect to see another similar 20% growth in urea consumption in Australia, because not only have we had another good year of weather, but we've also got the increase in grain and canola pricing that we've been seeing as a result of the impacts in Europe. Those impacts in Europe have actually had a 30% decrease in the seaborne availability of urea. And just like anything made of gas at the moment in the international space, urea pricing has gone through the roof because it is effectively solid gas. And finally, in a normal year, we would attack about 25% of the cost of a tonne of grain and about 54% of the carbon associated with a tonne of grain here in Western Australia, because we are domesticating supply chains, we're using great technology, and we're using low impurity adjacent natural gas in WA to make our urea. And we're doing it on a piece of land that we just acquired, 3,500 hectares of land in the Midwest. It's an area we now call the low carbon manufacturing precinct, because not only is it host to sitting over the top of 65% of the South Erregulla gas field discoveries and polygons, but it also it owns a piece of the ridge line, which is 30 kilometres inland, 300 metres elevated, and is host to most of Western Australia's top performing renewable assets. It's actually some of Australia's top performing renewable assets. So we've got the ability to take 70 megawatts of gas-fired power out of our urea plant and displace it with some of Australia's top performing renewable energy, all in our own asset base. We're using the Midwest not just as a great place for gas and for subsurface results like in our geothermal, but we're also using the natural renewable endowment that land comes with. Here's a little layer cake you can see with the fertilizer plant sitting above that, the gas field sitting below, a sequestration reservoir that we've recently discovered and appraised as well. We're doing some work on the storage capacity there, and the wind farms sitting on top of that. But lastly, there is method in the madness. The West Australian government's last piece of last clue that they stuck out in front of everyone in August 2021 around navigating the export ban and getting an export exemption in Western Australia came from the downstream opportunity study. That study, which was produced by ASOL Allen and then replied to by the West Australian government, effectively said those gas suppliers that support the creation of downstream manufacturing facilities in Western Australia should be able to access export capacity. And there is the clue. Fundamentally, if you think about the Northwest Shelf, it consumes about 3,000 terajoules a day of gas and employs around 114 people on the plant. Project Haber will consume 73 terajoules a day of gas and employ 300 people every day on that plant. These are job-creating pieces of infrastructure, and this is what the state government is trying to get us all to do. So with that, thanks very much.
I did not mean to stand up and stop you so abruptly then, so that was very interesting, and obviously a room full of people hanging on to every word. Darren, did you want to say any little comments there? Nothing? No, he's saying, get away from me, Christina, get away from me. Okay, so it's up to you to make your decisions based on that information that our presenter has given us. We're going to take a break for morning tea. I'll ring the bell, grab you all back in here. Next session has got that presenter that Argonaut said they were investing in, so make sure you're in the room for that one. Cheers.